The movie opens in 1967, where a pregnant woman is being rushed to a hospital. She is severely bleeding from the neck, appearing as if she was attacked by some kind of animal. The doctors perform an emergency C-section and save the baby, but sadly, the woman dies. The scene then shifts to 30 years later, and we are introduced to a young man named Dennis who was in the car with his girlfriend. She takes him to an underground nightclub located somewhere in Los Angeles. As they enter the club, everyone begins to stare at Dennis in a creepy way. Just then, the sprinklers present there start showering blood. Boom. Boom. All the partygoers enjoy it, and they cheer in happiness, but Dennis goes into a state of panic. This is when we realize that all the people inside the club are actually vampires. Slowly, they turn their attention towards Dennis and proceed to attack him. But in the nick of time, our protagonist Blade arrives at the scene, clad in a black leather outfit. Turns out, Blade is the same child from the opening scene, who has now become a vampire hunter. The vampires launch their attack on Blade, but he easily defeats them using his special weapons. Eventually, all the vamps are either dead or have fled, except for Quinn, a muscular vampire. He tries to ambush Blade, but instead gets burnt to a crisp. Seconds later, the cops arrive at the scene, so Blade casually walks away. In the next scene, the police transport Quinn's burnt body to a local hospital, where a morgue technician named Curtis and a hematologist, Dr. Karen Jensen, conduct an examination on it. They discover numerous irregularities, including abnormally developed jaw muscles. As they discuss the test results, Quinn suddenly comes back to life and attacks both the doctors. The vampire immediately bites Curtis to death, but before he can do the same to Karen, Blade shows up. He effortlessly cuts off one of Quinn's arms, prompting him to run away. Blade then takes Karen to a safe house, where his old associate Abraham Whistler tends to her injuries. Abraham administers her with a solution of garlic essence and silver nitrate, expressing a cautious optimism about her chances of recovery, estimating them at 50-50. Elsewhere, we see a group of vampires discussing Blade's recent attack on their fellow members. One of the young vampires, named Deacon Frost, wants the vampires to outright rule the humans and simply use them as a food source, while an older vampire named Dragonetti prefers to maintain a peaceful coexistence. Dragonetti does not seem to like Frost because he is not a pure blood, as he merely became a vampire through the bite of another. The next morning, Karen wakes up and wanders around the safe house. During this, she witnesses Abraham injecting Blade with some blood serum. Later on, Abraham explains that he and Blade have been waging a secret war against vampires, using weapons based on their elemental weaknesses, such as sunlight, silver, and garlic, or, in the case of Blade, taxes. As Karen is now marked by the bite of a vampire, both he and Blade urge her to leave the city. Afterwards, Karen goes to her apartment and begins packing her belongings. As she prepares to leave, she is confronted by a police officer named Krieger, who is a human slave owned by a vampire. Krieger tries to attack her, but Blade once again comes to her rescue. He effortlessly subdues the corrupt cop and notices a tattoo on the back of his neck. Blade immediately recognizes it as the mark of Deacon Frost. He then lets Krieger go in the hopes of tracking him to another vampire club. Following this, Blade and Karen shadow Krieger to a new underground club. There, they come across a morbidly obese vampire named Pearl, who works as a record keeper. They torture him with a UV light, demanding that he give up information. At first, the pustulant freak of nature refuses, saying he'd rather die than snitch. But as soon as the UV light starts burning his skin, he speaks up. Pearl reveals that Frost wants to command a ritual where he would use 12 pure-blooded vampires to awaken the blood god, La Magra. Armed with this insight, the duo delves further into the vampire archives, housing pages extracted from the vampire Bible. Not long after, they find themselves ambushed by a faction of vampires led by Quinn, who is now healed and regrown his previously severed hand. Quinn is determined to exact vengeance, but he soon realizes the Blade has a radio link in his ear. Moments later, Abraham arrives at the scene and opens fire on the vampires. In the midst of the chaos, Blade cuts off the other hand of Quinn. Seizing an opportune moment, the trio then boards a passing subway car, making their escape. Returning to the safe house, Abraham reveals the complete backstory of Blade to Karen. He recounts that he found Blade on the streets, feeding upon homeless people. According to Abraham, Blade is a unique amalgamation of human and vampire traits, possessing the supernatural strengths of vampires. With that any of their weaknesses, except for the need to consume human blood. Abraham also reveals that he's been developing serums to curb Blade's cravings, but Blade's body is starting to resist it. The same evening, Abraham learns that his attempt to cure Karen was ineffective, and that she is growing close to turning into a vampire. Despite this, Karen refuses to give up. So she heads to the hospital where she used to work and brings some laboratory equipment in order to try and find a cure for both her and Blade. While experimenting with the anticoagulant EDTA as a potential substitute, she discovers that it has a violent reaction when it is mixed with vampire blood. Recognizing its potential, she gives it to Blade, envisioning it as a potent weapon against the vampires. Meanwhile, Quinn is at the vampire base, facing reprimand for his repeated failures. Frost orders him to go back out and capture Blade alive. This confuses Quinn, as his boss and all other vampires have been trying to kill Blade for a very long time, but so far, none have succeeded. Afterwards, Frost and his henchmen abduct Dragonetti and take him to a beach just before sunrise. They forcibly rip out the elder vampire's fangs, while Frost and his gang shield themselves with sunscreen, black clothing, and motorcycle helmets. It's so 90s it hurts. Then, Dragonetti is left to burn to death due to the sun's rays. After this, Frost confronts the remaining elders of the Vampire Council, demanding that 12 people volunteer for his La Magra project. In the next scene, as Blade goes to purchase more items for hunting, Abraham and Karen discuss her latest attempt to cure vampire bites. Karen is sure that the new formula will work on her, but she is unsure what effect it might have on Blade because of his vampiric nature. Nonetheless, she remains resolute in her belief that she can cure his bloodthirst, even if the process will take years. As the two continue chatting, Frost and his men suddenly barge inside their safe house. Abraham tries to shoot them with his special gun, but he is easily overwhelmed and beaten up. The bad guys then kidnap Karen and flee the scene. A short time later, Blade returns home, only to discover Abraham in a vegetative state. He is on the verge of dying due to the vampiric infection. In his final moments, he reveals about Frost's La Magra project, detailing that he is in search of Blade's blood. Abraham then requests Blade be careful, saying the existence of humanity depends on him. After this, he grabs Blade's gun and commits the unthinkable, fearing that he will turn into a vampire. Consumed by fury, Blade infiltrates Frost's headquarters and kills all of his men, any of them who come in his way. He attacks the vampires with EDTA, which makes them swell up and explode in a shower of blood and prosthetics. Blade finally reaches Frost's office, where he is confronted by a woman. She calls him by the name Eric, indicating that she knows him well. Then, in a shocking revelation, we get to know that the woman is none other than Blade's mother, who has been reborn as a vampire and has been serving for Frost. While Blade is distracted by this revelation, Frost and his men show up and hold him hostage. It is at this moment when Frost reveals himself as the vampire who bit his mother while she was pregnant. That's right. I'm your dad. After this, Blade and Karen are confined within a dark cell. During this, Blade asks Karen if she is finished with her experiment with a miracle cure. In response, she explains that the cure, if successful, would presumably take away all of his strength and healing powers. However, it would also neutralize his bloodthirst, effectively turning him into a complete human. Shortly after, Blade is subdued and taken to the Temple of Eternal Night, where Frost plans to perform the summoning ritual for La Magra. Meanwhile, Karen is thrown into a pit intended to be devoured by her former colleague Curtis, who is now transformed into a decomposing zombie-like creature. Curtis launches an assault on her, but Karen manages to fight back and somehow maneuvers her escape from the pit. She's giving a great name to Karens all around the world. In the next scene, Blade is put into a large torture device where his blood is extracted. As the ritual initiates, 12 members of the council are executed, and their souls are absorbed by Frost, turning him into La Magra, the blood god. A while later, Karen manages to free Blade from the torture device, but he now appears to be very weak. Realizing that there is only one way to get Blade healed in time, Karen asks him to drink her blood. He resists at first, but seeing no other choice, I guess if you're really gonna twist my arm, he finally sucks at the blood from her neck. Blade is revived in no time and seems to be stronger than ever. However, Frost completes the ritual by this time, securing the might of La Magra. Before confronting Frost, Blade's mother suddenly shows up and fights him. While Blade is on the brink of ending her life, she tries to manipulate him emotionally, invoking the maternal bond. However, Blade doesn't fall for her trick and ultimately strikes her with a fatal blow, ending her life. He then fights his way through the remaining vampire guards, reclaiming his trademark sword and also decapitating Quinn to reclaim his sunglasses. In the meantime, Karen also helps Blade in taking out some of the vampires by using the garlic mace, causing them to explode. After a while, Blade finally comes face to face with Frost, and an intense battle ensues between the two. Swords clash with impressive precision as they engage in combat. At one point, Blade severs Frost's arm and slices him in half, but the blood god's body takes no time to regenerate. When nothing else works, Blade grabs the packet of EDTA vials and hurls them all towards Frost, administering multiple injections across his body. The plan works, and as a consequence of the EDTA overdose, Frost's body swells up and explodes in a massive shower of blood, finally resulting in his demise. Blade does a cool victory pose and says, "Science rules!" In the aftermath of this event, Karen extends an offer to cure Blade, but he declines, reasoning that despite Frost's demise, there are many other vampires out there, and that he must finish all of them. Blade tells her that if she really wants to help him, she can create an improved version of this serum so that he can continue his crusade against vampires. In the final sequence, we see Blade confronting a vampire in Moscow. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.